There is a side of Malcolm Lowry which has affinities with George Orwell. Although with his conscience Lowry / the consul supports the Spanish Republicans, he distrusts propaganda and he dislikes the attitudinizing of Hugh, just as Orwell disliked the communist intellect. Oh shit. Okay. It was a bug. Ew. Ew. Okay. Oh, that was traumatic. Where was I? In his first novel, Ultramarine, his flat reporting of the conversations of the sailors, absorbed in the world of their own interests, ill-informed and unimaginative perhaps, but fundamentally saner than the upper classes and the political leftists, reveals an attitude not unlike that of Orwell towards the proles in 1984. Like Orwell's, and unlike those of the writers of both the 20s and 30s, Lowry's values are fundamentally derived from action. Like Orwell, Lowry was not a communist, and yet in his youth he took the step which the bourgeois communist intellectuals demanded. He, quote, joined the workers, unquote, by becoming a seaman and going on the voyage described in Ultramarine. The central paradox of Under the Volcano is that it is a novel about action that is, about action negated. At the center, there is an impassioned cry that men should attain simplicity of being, love and live and act in a world of simple choices. Conrad Knickerbocker quotes Lowry, "The real cause of alcoholism is the complete baffling sterility of existence as sold to you." This implies a spiritual isolation greater than that of Orwell, who, although he was opposed to existing political groups, nevertheless belongs to a party of anarcho-socialist conservative eccentrics, which the reader easily recognizes in his own heart. Lowry had isolation which condemned him to perpetual self-searching, in which the mind creating is inextricably involved in the work created. Because there is no solution in the contemporary world of bogus solutions, art itself becomes a form of defiant action. And here Lowry anticipates later artists, Jackson Pollock, for example. Self-involved yet selfless, intoxicated yet wholly lucid, drinking themselves into sobriety, who in their very excesses seem to acquire some quality of saintliness, as though undergoing what others might appear to be vices for the sake of the rest of us. Conrad Knickerbocker writes, speaking ventriloquiently through wilderness, the writer of the semi-fictitious journal Through the Panama, Lowry at first saw Under the Volcano not so much a novel as a sort of mighty, if preposterous, moral deed of some sort, testifying to an underlying toughness of fiber or stirring power. One could scarcely imagine a better description of Jackson Pollock's painting. Knickerbocker goes on, what Lowry/Wilderness recognized in a moment of terror was the self-consuming quality of the work. The consul has taken more than his share. Like an insolent familiar, he was never too far away. Lowry could not perform the vital surgery of separating himself from his characters. He suspected at times that he was not a writer so much as being written, and with panic he realized that self-identity was elusive as ever. Bleak. He could not separate himself from his own characters because they were expressions of his own isolation, his search for his identity. The exception to this is, of course, the portrait of Yvonne. She does indeed represent the alternative to the consul's isolation, relationship with someone other than the self trapped in his situation. She represents, indeed, several choices rejected by the consul, though here not altogether rejected by Lowry himself, as the story The Forced Path to Spring, which is the paradisio of his commedia, shows. One of these choices is a northern landscape different from Mexico. Mexico, Lowry writes, in a letter to a friend, the most Christ-awful place in the world with which to be in any form of distress, a sort of Moloch that feasts on suffering souls. The consul's despair is really acedia, the spiritual apathy of the religious who have come to believe, as it were, hermetically sealed off from the source of their religion. Okay. His errors are theological, refuse to love or to be loved. Ultimately, his fault is pride. There is a very moving passage recalling, oddly, Henry James' The Altar of the Dead, in which the consul is seen being led by Dr. Vigil into a church he did not know, with somber tapestries and strange votive pictures, a compassionate virgin floating in the gloom, to whom he prayed, with muddily beating heart, he might have Yvonne again. She is the virgin for those who have nobody with, the doctor told him, inclining his head towards the image, and for mariners on the sea. This is when Yvonne is away, and when she comes back and he rejects her, he finds himself praying before another image of the Virgin. Please let me make her happy. Deliver me from this dreadful tyranny of self. I have sunk low. Let me sink lower still, that I may know the truth. Teach me to love again, to love life. That wouldn't do either. Where is my love? Let me truly suffer. Give me back my purity, the knowledge of the mysteries that I have betrayed and lost. Let me be truly lonely, that I may honestly pray. Let us be happy again somewhere, if it's only together. If it's only out of this terrible world. Destroy the world, he cried in his heart. The consul inhabits a hell of Christian damnation, and his downfall is accompanied by a bell that speaks the words of Dante, dolente, dolore. He is profoundly ambivalent, as his prayers show, for when he prays to be reconciled with Yvonne, he also prays to be alone, and when he wants to rise, he asks that he may sink still lower. The ambivalence goes deeper than the portrayal of the consul. It is a cleavage in life of the book itself, and also in the heart of the writer, who is doomed to almost the same death as the hero. The question which remains unanswered is whether the consul's addiction is really planted in him, like Hamlet's madness, by the times, or whether he is not simply a failure. The circle of purgatory which the addict moves is one of unreality, in which there is an illusion of choices being made. The consul can refuse the next drink, even does do for some reasons. The consul can refuse the next drink, even does do sometimes for a few moments, but no real choice exists, for he has decided to be chosen by his addiction. Not only his addiction, also his mode of consciousness. Lowry thought that he did not write, but was written. But being chosen by one's addiction means also that there is a postponed choice, not in one's own hands, but in one's heart, though unknown to oneself, the choice which decides whether one is damned in hell or whether, without knowing it oneself, one is seeking redemption, whether one is in purgatory. This is the choice which becomes real in the ultimate moment of death, when the consul hears a voice calling him Pelato and at the same time Compañero. The consul is not in hell, but purgatory, surely. Here, too, the writer, Lowry, becomes inseparable from his creation, the consul, for the existence of the novel itself is the proof that, after all, Lowry / the consul did achieve a triumph of consciousness expressed with the utmost lucidity. Being chosen and accepting the condition of illusionary choices finally was justified in the choice implicit in the lucidity achieved, under the volcano. As I have pointed out, not me, the introduction guy, the theme of the consul's fatality is to be found on almost every page of the novel. However great the variations of his mood, themselves distorted and exaggerated by drink. The life of the consul resembles variations on the theme of music by some composers such as Beethoven, where the greatest possible variety of moods and rhythms are gone through without the elements of the theme being fundamentally altered. Yet perhaps this is to emphasize too much the side of the novel which embraces the consul's will to self-destruction. One also remembers this book for marvelous scenes of affirmation. The alternate life, although rejected, does appear. There is the wonderful scene in which Hugh and Yvonne, physically healthy, beautifully attractive, conscious of the world and their responsibilities public and private, walk through the valley and then ride the horses which they hire, with the foals running beside them. This is the open-air life of physical well-being and frank communication, yet it is subtly meretricious. They, Hugh especially, too consciously act out their roles. Later in the novel, parallel with the scene between Hugh and Yvonne, there is the moment when, drunk to the point of sobriety, the consul suddenly speaks to her openly, not concealing his true feelings. And contrasted with almost all the book, there's the sun overhead, and across half the world there are people fighting for their freedom, first in Spain and later against Hitler. Under the Volcano is an authentic modern tragedy, because somehow the murder of the consul by the fascist police transforms his life into a convincing affirmation of the values which he deeply knew, and which his own consciousness he did not destroy. The conclusion must be that it is religious. The contradictions of a hero who does not act and who fails to be a hero, the insistence implicit that the consul is the writer, and living and dying for all of us, the concern for values which are outside the time in a world entirely contemporary, are resolved in the theme of Divine Comedy, the progress of the soul. Okay, we're back after technical difficulties. Okay. Dun, 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 dun. Alrighty. Under the Volcano, and starting for real. Ooh. This is a quote from Antigone. Wonders are many, and none is more wonderful than man. The power that crosses the white sea, driven by the stormy south wind, making a path under surges that threaten to engulf him. And earth, the eldest of the gods, the immortal, unwearied, doth he wear, turning the soil with the offspring of horses, as the plows go to and fro from year to year. And the light-hearted race of birds, and the tributes of savage beasts, and the sea brood of the deep, he snares in the meshes of his woven toils. He leads captive, man excellent in wit. And he masters by his arts the beast whose lair is in the wilds, who roams the hills. He tames the horse of shaggy mane, he puts the yoke upon its neck. He tames the tireless mountain bull. And speech, and wind-swift thought, and all the moods that would mold a state, hath he taught himself, and how to flee the arrows of the frost, when it is hard lodging under the clear sky, and the arrows of the rushing rain. Yea, he hath resource for all. Within resource he meets nothing that must come. Only against death shall he call for aid in vain, but from baffling maladies he hath devised escapes. This is from John Bunyan, Grace Abounding for the Chiefs of Sinners. Now I bless the condition of the dog and toad, yea, gladly would I have been in the condition of the dog or horse, for I know they had no soul to perish under the everlasting weight of hell or sin, as mine was like to. Nay, and though I saw this, felt this, and was broken to pieces with it, yet that which added to my sorrow was, that I could not find with all my soul that I did desire deliverance. Finally, from Goethe, whosoever unceasingly strives upward, him we can save. One second. Let's check in the link. Cool. Okay, 1. Yay, we're starting. 2 mountain chains traverse the Republic roughly from north to south, forming between them a number of valleys and plateaus. Overlooking one of these valleys, which is dominated by 2 volcanoes, lies, 6,000 feet above sea level, the town of Quanahuac. It is situated well south of the Tropic of Cancer, to be exact on the 19th parallel. It is about the same latitude as the Revillagigedo Islands to the west in the Pacific, or much further west, the southmost tip of Hawaii. and is the port of Tsukok to the east on the Atlantic seaboard of Yucatan near the border of British Honduras, or, very much further east, the town of Juggernaut in India on the Bay of Bengal. The walls of this town, which is built on a hill, are high, the streets and lanes tortuous and broken, the roads winding. A fine American-style highway leads in from the north, but is lost in its narrow streets and comes out a goat truck. Guanajuato possesses 18 churches and 57 cantinas. It also boasts a golf course and no less than 400 swimming pools, public and private, filled with water that ceaselessly pours down from the mountains, and many splendid hotels. The Hotel Casino de la Selva stands on a slightly higher hill just outside the town, near the railway station. It is built far back from the main highway and surrounded by gardens and terraces, which command a spacious view in every direction. Palatial, a certain air of desolate splendor pervades it, for it is no longer a casino. You may not even dice for drinks in the bar. The ghosts of ruined gamblers haunt it. No one ever seems to swim in the magnificent Olympic pool. The springboards stand empty and mournful. Its Jaya-Lai courts are grass-grown and deserted. 2 tennis courts only are kept up in the season. Towards sunset on the Day of the Dead in November 1939, 2 men in white flannel sat on the main terrace of the casino drinking anise. They had been playing tennis, followed by billiards, and their rackets, rainproofed, screwed in their presses, the doctor's triangular, the other's quadrangular, lay on the parapet before them. As the processions winding from the cemetery down the hillside behind the hotel came closer to the plangent sounds of their chanting were borne to the 2 men, they turned to watch the mourners, a little later to be visible only as the melancholy lights of their candles, circling among the distant trussed cornstalks. Dr. Arturo Diaz Vigil pushed the bottle of anise del mono over to Monsieur Jacques Laurel, who was now leaning forward intently. Slightly to the right and below them, below the gigantic red evening, whose reflection bled away in the deserted swimming pools scattered everywhere like so many mirages, lay the peace and sweetness of the town. It seemed peacefully enough from where they were sitting. Only if one listened intently, as Monsieur Laurel was doing now, could one distinguish a remote, confused sound, distinct yet somehow inseparable from the minute murmuring, the tintinnabulation of the mourners, as of singing, rising, and falling, and a steady trampling, the bangs and cries of the fiesta that had been going on all day. Monsieur Laurel poured himself another anise. He was drinking anise because it reminded him of absinthe. A deep flush had suffused his face, and his hands trembled slightly over the bottle, from whose label a florid demon brandished a pitchfork at him. I meant to persuade him to go away and get d'alcoholisé, Dr. Vigil was saying. He stumbled over the word in French and continued in English, as did I. But I was so sick of myself that day after the ball that I suffer physically, really. That is very bad, for we doctors must comport ourselves like apostles. You remember, we played tennis that day too. Well, after I looked the consul in his garden, I sent a boy down to see if he would come for a few minutes and knock my door. I would appreciate it to him. If not, please write me a note, if drinking has not killed him already. Monsieur Laurel smiled. But they have gone, the other went on. And yes, I think to ask you too that day if you would look to him at his house. He was at my house when you telephoned, Arturo. Oh, I know. But we got so horrible drunkenness that night before, so perfectamente borracho, that it seemed to me the consul's as sick as I am. Dr. Vigil shook his head. Sickness is not only in body, but in that part used to be called soul. Poor your friend. He spends his money on earth in such contagious tragedies. Monsieur Laurel finished his drink. He rose and went to the parapet, resting his hands one on each tennis racket. He gazed down and around him, the abandoned Jaya-Lai courts, their bastions covered with grass, the dead tennis courts, the fountain, quite near the center of the hotel avenue, where a cactus farmer had reined up his horse to drink. 2 young Americans, a boy and a girl, had started a belated game of ping pong on the veranda of the annex below. What had happened just a year ago today seemed already to belong in a different age. One would have thought the horrors of the present would have swallowed it up like a drop of water. It was not so. Though tragedy was in the process of becoming unreal and meaningless, it seemed one was still permitted to remember the days when an individual life held some value and was not a mere misprint in a communique. He lit a cigarette. Far to his left in the northeast, beyond the valley and the terraced foothills of the Sierra Madre Oriental, the two volcanoes, Popocatépetl and Ixtaquihuatl, you see it? Your guess is as good as mine. Rose clear and magnificent into the sunset. Nearer, perhaps 10 miles distant, and on a lower level than the main valley, he made out the village of Tomalin, nestling behind the jungle from which rose a thin blue scarf of illegal smoke, someone burning wood for carbon. Before him, on the other side of the American highway, spread fields and groves, through which meandered a river and the Alcapancingo Road. The watchtower of a prison rose over a wood between the river and the road, which lost itself further on where the purple hills of Adore Paradise sloped away in the distance. Over in the town, the lights of Coanahuac's one cinema, built on an incline and standing out sharply, suddenly came on, flickered off, came on again. No se puede vivir sin amar, Monsieur Laurel said, as that a stupido ascribed on my house. Come, amigo, throw away your mind, Dr. Vigil said behind him. But hombre, Yvonne came back. That's what I shall never understand. She came back to the man. Monsieur Laurel returned to the table where he poured himself and drank a glass of Tehuacan mineral water. He said, Salud y pesetas. Y tiempo para gastarlas, his friend returned thoughtfully. Monsieur Laurel watched the doctor leaning back in the steamer chair, yawning, the handsome, impossibly handsome, dark, imperturbable Mexican face. The kind, deep brown eyes, innocent too, like the eyes of those wistful, beautiful Oaxacan children one saw in Tehuantepec, that ideal spot where women did the work while men bathed in the river all day. The slender small hands and delicate wrists, upon the back of which it was almost a shock to see the sprinkling of coarse black hair. I threw away my mind long ago, Arturo, he said in English, withdrawing his cigarette from his mouth with refined, nervous fingers, on which he was aware he wore too many rings. What I find more, Monsieur Laurel noted the cigarette was out and gave himself another anise. Con permiso. Dr. Vigil conjured a flaring lighter out of his pocket so swiftly it seemed it must have been already ignited there, that he had drawn the flame out of himself, the gesture and the igniting one movement. He held the light for Monsieur Laurel. Did you never go to the church for the bereaved there? He asked suddenly. Where is the Virgin for those who have nobody with? Monsieur Laurel shook his head. Nobody go there. Only those who have nobody them with, the doctor said slowly. He pocketed the lighter and looked at his watch, turning his wrist upward with a neat flick. Allons nous en, he said. Vamonos. And laughed yawningly with a series of nods that seemed to carry his body forward until his head was resting between his hands. Then he rose and joined Monsieur Laurel at the parapet, drawing deep breaths. Ah, but this is the hour I love, when the sun is coming down, when all the men began to sing and all the dogs to shark. Monsieur Laurel laughed. While they had been talking, the sky had grown wild and stormy to the south. The mourners had left the slope of the hill. Sleepy vultures, high overhead, deployed downwind. About 8:30 then. I might go to the cine for an hour. Bueno, I will see you this night then, in the place where you know. Remember, I still do not believe you are leaving tomorrow. He held out his hand, which Monsieur Laurel grasped firmly, loving him. Try and come tonight. If not, please understand I am always interested in your health. Hasta la vista. Hasta la vista. Alone, standing beside the highway down which he had driven 4 years before on that last mile of that long, insane, beautiful journey from Los Angeles, Monsieur Laurel also found it hard to believe where he was really going. Then the thought of tomorrow seemed well nigh overwhelming. He had paused, undecided which way to walk home, as the little overloaded bus, Tomalin, Zocalo, jounced past him downhill towards the barranca before climbing into Quanahuac. He was loth to take that same direction tonight. He crossed the street, making for the station. Although he would not be traveling by train, the sense of departure, of its imminence, came heavily about him again, as the childish avoiding the locked points, he picked his path over the narrow gauge lines. Light from the setting sun glanced off the oil tanks on the grass embankment beyond. The platform slept. The trains were vacant, the signals up. There was little to suggest any train ever arrived at this station, let alone left it. Yet a little less than a year ago, the place had been the scene of a parting he would never forget. He had not liked the consul's half-brother at their first encounter when he had come with Yvonne and the consul himself to Monsieur Laurel's house in the Calle Nicaragua. He felt now that Hugh had liked him. Hugh's odd appearance, though such was the overwhelming effect of meeting Yvonne again, he did not obtain even the impression of oddity so strongly that he was able later in Parian immediately to recognize him, had merely seemed to caricature the constable's amiable, half-bitter description of him. So this was the child Monsieur Laurel vaguely remembered hearing about years before. In half an hour he dismissed him as an irresponsible boor, a professional indoor marksman. Marx like Karl Marx. And self-conscious, really, but affecting a romantic, extroverted air. While Hugh, who for various reasons had certainly not been prepared by the consul to meet Monsieur Laurel, doubtless saw him as an even more precious type of boor, the elderly aesthete, a confirmedly promiscuous bachelor, with a rather unctuous, possessive nature toward women. But 3 sleepless nights later, an eternity had been lived through. Grief and bewilderment at an unassimilable catastrophe had brought them together. In the hours which followed his response to Hugh's telephone call from Parian, Monsieur Laurel learned much about Hugh, his hopes, his fears, his self-deceptions, his despairs. When Hugh left, it was as if he had lost a son. Careful of his tennis clothes, Monsieur Laurel climbed the embankment. Yet he was right, he told himself, as reaching the top he paused for breath, right after the consul had been discovered, though meantime the grotesquely pathetic situation had developed where there was not, on probable the first occasion when one had been so urgently needed, a British consul in Quanahuac to appeal to. Right in insisting that Hugh should waive all conventional scruples and take every advantage of the curious reluctance of the police to hold him. Their anxiety, it all but appeared, to be rid of him just when it seemed highly logical they should detain him as a witness, at least in one aspect of what now at a distance one could almost refer to as the case, and at the earliest possible moment joined that ship providentially awaiting him at Veracruz. Monsieur Laurel looked back at the station. Hugh left a gap. In a sense he had decamped with the last of his illusions, for Hugh, at 29, still dreamed, even then, of changing the world. There was no other way of saying this. Through his actions, just as Laurel, at 42, had still then not quite given up hope of changing it through the great films he proposed somehow to make. But today these dreams seemed absurd and presumptuous. After all, he had made great films as great films went in the past. And so far as he knew, they had not changed the world in the slightest. However, he had acquired a certain identity with Hugh. Like Hugh, he was going to Veracruz, and like Hugh, too, he did not know if his ship would ever reach port. Monsieur Laurel's way led through half-cultivated fields bordered by narrow grass paths, trodden by cactus farmers coming home from work. It was thus far a favorite walk, though not taken since before the rains. The leaves of cacti attracted with their freshness. Green trees shot by evening sunlight might have been weeping willows tossing in the gusty wind which had sprung up. A lake of yellow sunlight appeared in the distance below pretty hills like loaves. But there was something baleful now about the evening. Black clouds plunged up to the south. The sun poured molten glass onto the fields. The volcano seemed terrifying in this wild sunset. Monsieur Laurel walked swiftly, in the good heavy tennis shoes he should have already packed, swinging his tennis racket. A sense of fear had possessed him again, a sense of being, after all these years, and on his last day here, still a stranger. 4 years, almost 5, and he still felt like a wanderer on another planet. Not that it made it any less the hard to be leaving, even though he would soon, God willing, see Paris again. Ah well, he had a few emotions about the war, save that it was bad. One side or the other would win, and in either case life would be hard, though if the Allies lost it would be harder, and in either case one's own battle would go on. How continually, how startlingly, the landscape had changed. Now the fields were full of stones. There was a row of dead trees. An abandoned plow, silhouetted against the sky, raised its arms to heaven in mute supplication. Another planet he reflected against, a strange planet where, if you look a little further, beyond the Tres Marias, you would find every sort of landscape at once. The Cotswolds, Windermere, New Hampshire, the meadows of the Ured-Lore, even the grey dunes of Cheshire, even the Sahara, a planet upon which, in the twinkling of an eye, you could change climates, and, if you cared to think so, in the crossing of a highway, 3 civilizations. But beautiful, there was no denying its beauty, fatal or cleansing as it happened to be, the beauty of the earthly paradise itself. Yet in the earthly paradise, what had he done? He had made few friends. He had acquired a Mexican mistress with whom he quarreled, and numerous beautiful Mayan idols he would be unable to take out of the country. And he had... Monsieur Laurel wondered if it was going to rain. It sometimes, though rarely, did at this time of year. As last year, for instance, it rained when it should not. And those were storm clouds in the south. He imagined he could smell the rain, and it ran in his head he would enjoy nothing better than to get wet, soaked through to the skin, to walk on and on through this wild country, in his clinging white flannels getting wetter and wetter and wetter. He watched the clouds, dark swift horses surging upon the sky. A black storm breaking out of its season. That was what love was like, he thought, love which came too late. Only no sane calm succeeded it, as when the evening fragrance or slow sunlight and warmth returned to the surprised land. Monsieur Laurel hastened his steps still further. And yet such love strikes you dumb, blind, mad, dead. Your fate would not be altered by your simile. I'm going to read that one again. And let such love strike you dumb, blind, mad, dead. Your fate would not be altered by your simile. Tonnerre de Dieu. It slacked no thirst to say what love was like, which came too late. The town was almost directly to his right and above him, for Monsieur Laurel had been walking gradually downhill since leaving the Casino de la Selva. From the fields he was crossing he could see, over the trees on the slope of the hill, and beyond the dark castled shape of the Cortes Palace, the slowly revolving Ferris wheel, already lit up, in the square of Quanahuac. He thought he could distinguish the sound of human laughter rising from its bright gondolas, and, again, that faint intoxication of voices singing, diminishing, dying in the wind, inaudible finally. A despondent American tune, the St. Louis Blues, or some such, was borne across the fields to him, at times a soft wind-blown surge of music from which skimmed a spray of gabbling, that seemed not so much to break against as to be thumping the walls and towers of the outskirts. Then, with a moan, it would be sucked back into the distance. He found himself in the lane that led away through the brewery to the Tomalin Road. He came to the Alcapancingo Road. A car was passing, and as he waited, face averted, for the dust to subside, he recalled that time motoring with Yvonne and the consul along the Mexican lake bed, itself once the crater of a huge volcano, and saw again the horizon softened by dust, the buses whizzing past with the whirling dust, the shuddering boys standing on the backs of the lorries holding on for grim death, their faces bandaged against the dust, and there was a magnificence about this, he always felt, some symbolism for the future, for which such truly great preparation has been made by a heroic people, since all over Mexico one could see those thundering lorries with those young builders in them, standing erect, their trousers flapping hard, legs planted wide, firm. And in the sunlight, on the round hill, the lone section of dust advancing. The dust-darkened hills by the lake like islands in the driving rain. The consul, whose old house Monsieur Laurel now made out on the slope beyond the barranca, had seemed happy enough to. Then, wandering around the Cholula with its 306 churches and its 2 barber shops, the toilet and the harem, and climbing the ruined pyramid later, which he had proudly insisted was the original Tower of Babel. How admiringly he had concealed what must have been the babble of his thoughts. 2 ragged Indians were approaching Monsieur Laurel through the dust. They were arguing, but with the profound concentration of university professors wandering in summer twilight through the Sorbonne. Their voices, gestures of their refined, grimy hands, were unbelievably courtly and delicate. Their carriage suggested the majesty of Aztec princes, their faces obscure sculpture on Yucatan ruins. Perfectamente borracho, completamente fantástico. Sí, hombre, la vida impersonal. Claro, hombre, positivamente. Buenas noches, buenas noches. They passed into the dusk. The Ferris wheel sank from sight. The sounds of the fair, the music, instead of coming closer, had temporarily ceased. Monsieur Laurel looked into the west. A knight of old, with a tennis racket for a shield and pocket torch for scrip. He dreamed a moment of battles the soul survived to wander there. He had intended turning down another lane into the night. To the right. That led past the model farm where the Casino de la Selva grazed its horses, directly into his street, the Calle Nicaragua. But on a sudden impulse he turned left along the road running by the prison. He felt an obscure desire on his last night to bid farewell to the ruins of Maximilian's palace. To the south an immense archangel, black as thunder, beat up from the Pacific. And yet, after all, the storm contained its own secret calm. His passion for Yvonne, whether or not she'd ever been much good as an actress, was beside the point. He told her the truth when he said she would have been more good in any film he made. Had brought back to his heart in a way... What has happened? Had brought back to his heart in a way he could not have explained the first time that alone, walking over the meadows from Saint-Prez, the sleepy French village of backwaters and locks and gray disused watermills where he was lodging, he had seen, rising slowly and wonderfully and with boundless beauty above the stubble fields, blowing with wildflowers, slowly rising into the sunlight, as centuries before the pilgrims straying over those same fields had watched them rise, the twin spirals of Chartres Cathedral. His love had brought a peace, for all too short a while, that was strangely like the enchantment, the spell, of Chartres itself. Long ago, whose every side street he had come to love, and cafe where he could gaze at the cathedral eternally sailing in the clouds. The spell not even the fact that he was scandalously in debt there could break. Monsieur Laurel walked swiftly on towards the palace. Nor had any remorse for the consul's plight broken that other spell 15 years later here in Guanajuato. For that moment, Monsieur Laurel reflected, when he had reunited with the consul and himself for a time, even after Yvonne left, was not, on either side, remorse. It was, perhaps, partly, more the desire for that illusory comfort, about as satisfying as biting on an aching tooth, to be derived from the mutual unspoken pretense that Yvonne was still here. Ah, but all these things might have seemed a good enough reason for putting the whole earth between themselves and Guanajuato, yet neither had done so. And now Monsieur Laurel could feel their burden pressing upon him from the outside, as if somehow it had been transferred to these purple mountains all around him, so mysterious with their secret mines of silver, so withdrawn, yet so close, so still, and from these mountains emanated a strange melancholy force that tried to hold him here bodily, which was its weight, the weight of many things, but mostly that of sorrow. He passed a field where a faded blue Ford, a total wreck, had been pushed beneath a hedge on a slope. 2 bricks had been set under its front wheels against involuntary departure. "What are you waiting for?" he wanted to ask it, feeling a sort of kinship, an empathy, for those tatters of an ancient hood flapping. "Darling, why did I leave? Why did you leave me?" It was not to Monsieur Laurel that these words on that long-belated postcard of Yvonne's had been addressed, that postcard which the consul must have maliciously put under his pillow sometime on that last morning. But how could one ever be so sure when? As though the consul had calculated it all. knowing Monsieur Laurel would discover it at the precise moment that Hugh, distraughtly, would call out from Perrien. Perrien! To his right towered the prison walls. Upon the watchtower, just visible below them, 2 policemen peered east and west in the binoculars. Monsieur Laurel crossed a bridge over to the river, then took a short-cut through a wide clearing in the woods, evidently being laid out as a botanical gardens. Birds came swarming out of the southeast, small, black, ugly birds, yet too long, something like monstrous insects, something like crows, with awkward long tails and an undulating, bouncing, labored flight. Shatterers of the twilight hour, they were flapping their way feverishly home, as they did every night, to roost within the Fresno trees in the Zocalo, which until nightfall would ring with their incessant drilling, mechanic screech. Straggling, the obscene concourse hushed and pedaled by. By the time he reached the palace, the sun had set. In spite of his amour propre, he immediately regretted having come. The broken pink pillars in the half-light might have been wanting to fall down on him. The pool, covered with green scum, its steps torn away and hanging by one rotting clump to close over his head. The shattered, evil-smelling chapel, overgrown with weeds, the crumbling walls splashed with urine, on which scorpions lurked. Wrecked entablature, sad archivolt, slippery stones covered with excreta. This place, where love had once brooded, seemed part of a nightmare. And Laurel was tired of nightmares. France, even in Austrian guise, should not transfer itself to Mexico, he thought. Maximilian had been unlucky in his places, too. Poor devil. Why did they have to call that other fatal palace in Trieste also the Miramar, where Carlotta went insane? And everyone who ever lived there, from Empress Elizabeth of Austria to the Archduke Ferdinand, had met with violent death. And yet, how they must have loved this land, these 2 lonely, empurpled exiles. Human beings finally, lovers of their own element. Their Eden, without either knowing quite why, beginning to turn under their noses into a prison and smell like a brewery, their only majesty at last that of tragedy. Ghosts, ghosts. As that the casino certainly lived there. And a ghost who still said, "It is our destiny to come here, Carlotta. Look at this rolling, glorious country. Its hills, its valleys, its volcanoes beautiful beyond belief. And to think that it is ours. Let us be good and constructive and make ourselves worthy of it." Or were they ghosts quarreling? No, you loved yourself. You loved your misery more than I. You did this deliberately to us. I? You always had people to look after you, to love you, to use you, to lead you. You listened to everyone save me, who really loved you. No, you're the only person I've ever loved. Ever? You've loved me only yourself. No, it was you. It was always you. You must believe me, please. Do you remember how we were always planning to go to Mexico? Do you remember? Yes, you were right. I had my chance with you. Never a chance like that again. And suddenly they were weeping together, passionately, as they stood. But it was the consul's voice, not Maximilian's. Laurel could almost have heard it in the palace, and he remembered as he walked on, thankful he had finally struck the Calle Nicaragua even at its furthest end, the day he stumbled upon the consul and Yvonne embracing there. It was not very long after their arrival in Mexico, and how different the palace had seemed to him then. Laurel slackened his pace. The wind had dropped. He opened his English tweed coat, bought, however, from High Life, pronounced Edgeleaf, New Mexico. It's funny. And loosened his blue polka-dotted scarf. The evening was unusually oppressive. And how silent. Not a sound, not a cry reached his ears. Nothing but the clumsy suction of his footsteps. Not a soul in sight. Laurel felt slightly chafed, too. His trousers bound him. He was getting too fat. He had already got too fat in Mexico, which suggested another odd reason some people might have for taking up arms that would never find its way into the newspapers. Absurdly, he swung his tennis racket into the air. Through the motions of a serve, a return, but it was too heavy. He had forgotten about the press. He passed the model farm on his right, the buildings, the fields, the hills shadowy now in the swiftly gathering gloom. The Ferris wheel came into view again, just the top, silently burning high on the hill, almost directly in front of him. Then the trees rose up over it. The road, which was terrible and full of potholes, went steeply downhill here. He was approaching the little bridge over the barranca, the deep ravine. Halfway across the bridge he stopped. He lit a new cigarette from the one he'd been smoking and leaned over the parapet, looking down. It was too dark to see to the bottom, but here was finality indeed, and cleavage. Quanahuac was like the times in this respect. Wherever you turned, the abyss was waiting for you around the corner. Dormitory for vultures and city Moloch. When Christ was being crucified, so ran the seaborne hieratic legend, the earth had opened all through this country, though the coincidence could hardly have impressed anyone then. It was on this bridge the consul had once suggested to him he make a film about the Atlantis. Yes, leaning over just like this, drunk but collected, coherent, a little mad, a little impatient. It was one of those occasions where the consul had drunk himself sober. He had spoken to him about the spirit of the abyss, the god of the storm, Huracan, that testified so suggestively to the intercourse between opposite sides of the Atlantic, whatever that meant. Though it was not the first occasion the consul and he had stood looking into an abyss, for there had always been, ages ago, and how could one forget it, the hell bunker, and that other encounter there which seemed to bear some obscure relation to the later one in Maximilian's palace. Had his discovery of the consul here in Quanahuac really been so extraordinary, the discovery that his old English playmate, he could scarcely call him schoolmate, whom he hadn't seen for nearly a quarter of a century, was actually living in his street, and had been, without his knowledge, for 6 weeks? Probably not. Probably it was just one of those meaningless correspondences that might be labeled favorite trick of the gods. But how vividly, again, that old seaside holiday in England came back to him. Monsieur Laurel, who had been born in Languan in the Moselle County, but his father, a rich philatelist of remote habits, had moved to Paris, usually spent his summer holidays as a boy with his parents in Normandy. Courcelles in Calvados on the English Channel was not a fashionable resort. Far from it. There were a few windy, battered pensions, miles of desolate sand dunes, and the sea was very cold. But it was to Courcelles, nevertheless, in the sweltering summer of 1911, that the family of the famous English poet, Abraham Taskerson, had come, bringing with them the strange little Anglo-Indian orphan, a broody creature of 15, so shy and yet so curiously self-contained, who wrote poetry that old Taskerson, who'd stayed at home, apparently encouraged him with, and who sometimes burst out crying if he mentioned in his presence the word father or mother. Jacques, about the same age, had felt oddly attracted to him, and since the other Taskerson boys, at least 6, mostly older, and, it would appear, all of a tougher breed, though they were in fact collateral relatives of a young Geoffrey Firmin, tended to band together and leave the lad alone. He saw a great deal of him. They wandered together along the shore with a couple of old cliques, brought from England and some wretched gutta-percha golf balls, to be driven on their last afternoon gloriously into the sea. Geoffrey became the old bean, Laurel Murray, to whom, however, he was that beautiful English young poet. Liked him too. Taskerson Murray had Taskerson Mere had taken the fancy to the French boy. The upshot was Jacques was asked to spend September in England with the Taskersons, where Geoffrey would be staying till the commencement of his school term. Jacques' father, who planned sending him to an English school till he was 18, consented. Particularly he admired the erect, manly carriage of the Taskersons, and that was how Monsieur Laurel came to Liasseau. It was a kind of grown-up, civilized version of Courcelles on the English northwest coast. The Taskersons lived in a comfortable house whose back garden abutted on a beautiful, undulating golf course bound on the far side by the sea. It looked like the sea. Actually, it was the estuary, 7 miles wide, of a river. White horses westward marked where the real sea began. The Welsh mountains, gaunt and black and cloudy, with occasionally a snow peak to remind you of India, lay across the river. During the week, when they were allowed to play, the course was deserted, yellow ragged sea poppies fluttering in the spiny sea grass. On the shore were the remains of an antediluvian forest with ugly stumps showing, and further up, an old stubby deserted lighthouse. There was an island in the estuary, with a windmill on it like a curious black flower, which you could ride out at low tide on a donkey. The smoke of the freighters outward bound from Liverpool hung low on the horizon. There was a feeling of space and emptiness. Only at weekends did a certain disadvantage appear at their sight. Although the season was drawing to a close and the gray hydropathic hotels along the promenades were emptying, the golf course was packed all day with Liverpool brokers playing foursomes. From Saturday morning till Sunday night, a continuous hail of golf balls flying out of bounds bombarded the roof. Then it was a pleasure to go out with Geoffrey into the town, which was still full of laughing pretty girls, and walk through the sunlit, windy streets, or to look at one of the comical Perrault shows on the beach. Or best of all, they would sail on the marine lake in a borrowed 12-foot yacht, managed expertly by Geoffrey.